and welcome. You may remember we recently uploaded this video, however when we did, we got a lot of negative feedback regarding the poor audio quality, so we tried to improve this and we hope it's better. Today, we're going to be discussing 3 horrifying real-life events. We think these will be unknown to most of you as we've never seen them on any other videos. Enjoy.
In 1993, a teenager named Kellyanne Bates from the city of Manchester, England, met James Patterson Smith while babysitting for one of his friends. The relationship between the 45-year-old divorcee and the 14-year-old began here. After concealing this for 2 years, James Smith was finally introduced to Kellyanne's parents. Her mother would later be quoted as saying, "As soon as I saw Smith, the hairs on the back of my neck went up. I tried everything I could to get Kellyanne away from him." But not wanting a conflict to develop between her and her daughter, who had now seemingly abandoned her previous ambitions, with Smith being her sole focus, she said nothing. And Kellyanne would move in with him soon after. Over time, Kellyanne would become more withdrawn. They would speak to her on the phone, but even these phone calls would stop over time. Birthday and Christmas cards would arrive with only Smith having written in them. When asked if they could come to visit her, Smith would tell them that she was not at home. They would never see Kellyanne alive again. On the 16th of April 1996, Smith would enter a police station to say his girlfriend had accidentally died after swallowing water while they were, in his words, going at it in the bath. This was not the case. Investigating her death, police would find Bates's blood in every room of the house. Her body had 150 separate injuries obtained over a prolonged period of abuse, during which she would be kept in Smith's cellar. In the 4 weeks leading up to her death, Kellyanne Bates had been burnt with cigarettes and branded with hot iron. She had multiple incisions from knives, forks and scissors, found not only on her body, but also on the inside of her mouth. A ligature mark around her neck indicated strangulation. Her feet and buttocks were scalded from boiling water, and injuries indicated she had been tied to a radiator by her hair. At some point in these 4 weeks, her hands and knees had been crushed to render her unable to escape. Kellyanne had been partially scalped. Her facial features and genitalia had been mutilated, but surprisingly it does not stop here. Up to 3 weeks before her eventual death, both of her eyes had been gouged out, and she had sustained stab wounds and lacerations to her empty eye sockets. She was given no food or water for several days before her death, which came from being beaten unconscious with a shower head and then drowned in the bath. At Smith's trial, previous partners would come forward with allegations of abuse. One saying her face was held under the tap, another saying she was nothing more than a human punch bag to him. It took the jury just 1 hour to find James Patterson Smith guilty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 20 years. After the trial, every member of the jury of 7 men and 5 women accepted the offer of professional counselling.
In 2011, a Russian man, Anatoly Moskvin, was arrested after a police tip-off that he may have been involved in recent grave desecrations. Nothing could have prepared the police for what they would find upon investigation of his home. Over the course of 10 years, Moskvin had taken young girls from their graves. He attempted to preserve them using baking soda and salt. He allowed them to dry out near the cemetery before eventually returning them to his home, dressing them in clothes, stuffing their bodies with rags and toys, then occasionally inserting music boxes within their torso so that they would make sounds when touched. Most of these played children's music. He admitted to having parties for these children who he referred to as his girls. He made wax masks for some of them, also putting on lipstick and nail polish. One girl he kept within his home for over 9 years. He lived in an apartment with his parents, who spent long periods of time away from home each year, and said they believed he was just making dolls and had no idea what was beneath the masks. As a personal opinion, I find this very hard to believe, as many could not be confused as anything other than what they were, and his neighbour even said there was a rancid smell from the apartment, although it is believed that his parents were the ones to eventually alert the police to his activities. He admitted he thought of himself as an expert in mummification, and said he hoped one day there would be advancements in science enough that they could return the girls to life. One girl was found to have a piece of her own gravestone with her name written on it inside her body. Another contained a hospital tag with their date and cause of death cited. Inside another was a dried human heart. He covered their faces in fabric and would insert buttons or doll's eyes into their eye sockets so they could, in his words, watch cartoons with him. In total, 29 girls were removed from his apartment, ranging in age from 3 to 25. In court, Moskvin confessed to 44 counts of abusing graves and dead bodies. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and sentenced to time in a psychiatric ward. As of September 2018, he has been given the opportunity to continue psychiatric treatment within his home. During his trial, he was said to have turned to the parents of his victims and stated, "You abandoned your girls. I brought them home and warmed them up."
On the morning of Christmas Day 2008, Brenda Rankin went round to her 81-year-old mother's house on Dublin Road, Newry, in Northern Ireland. She found her mother, Mara Rankin, dead in her bedroom. There were obvious signs of a struggle. The Christmas presents laid out in the living room were all torn into, but as police would later discover, there had been no forced entry into the property. The post-mortem examination revealed that Mrs. Rankin had been subject to a sustained assault, which left her with a serious head injury alongside 15 broken ribs. The murder weapon was found to be the crucifix that would hang above the deeply religious Mara's bed, the solid metal effigy of Christ having been split in two and broken away from the cross in the savage beating. At some point during the attack, the perpetrator had knelt on Mara's chest and forced her head back, pressing and rocking the crown of thorns against the skin under her chin with considerable force. There were found to be outgoing calls from Mara's phone to a certain number. The area code was incorrect, but these calls were made to the man who was her next-door neighbour, and the husband of the owner of a pharmaceutical business, Karen Walsh. When questioned by police, she said she had visited Mara on the night of Christmas Eve, but had left hours before her time of death and slept until midday. Though Karen, along with Mara's family and other neighbours, were the only suspects at the time, after further examination into Mara's body, Mrs. Walsh seemed less likely to be the killer. 81-year-old Mrs. Rankin had internal bruising and injuries to her genitals, consistent with sexual assault. Her broken ribs implied that someone had been on top of her, and her injuries suggested rape, as opposed to an attack with a rough object. After the testimony of another of Mara's neighbours, Carmel, implied that Karen Walsh was smoking outside the address long after she had stated to be asleep. A cigarette with Karen's DNA on it was found outside that would support this account. Karen was arrested on suspicion of the murder. There seemed to be no motive for killing Mrs. Rankin in such a brutal manner, but Karen was a very heavy drinker. Kept in remand, she had apparently described the events of that night to a fellow prisoner. In a statement made to the police by this individual, Karen had allegedly told her she had visited Mara after an argument with her husband. She had been heavily drinking, and after Mrs. Rankin chastised her for this behaviour, she claimed to have pushed her over, resulting in a knock to Mara's head. After this, she would proceed to pull the crucifix from the wall and finish the elderly woman off with it. In an attempt to make it seem like a sexually motivated attack by a male, she then violated Mara's lifeless body with a smooth foreign object. This testimony was not given at the trial due to the witness's lack in credibility, but Karen Walsh was still sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison for the attack. She has sought to overturn her conviction twice, losing both appeals on all grounds. Thanks for watching. Have a good week, folks.